While we are on the topic of confessions, well, I have another confession to make. So in my last video, I made a confession that I did not sit down and watch the entire Wendi Adelson police interview, and perhaps I should not have called it an interrogation. It's an interview. So I did not sit down and watch that until very recently. Well, I have another confession to make after all. It is the end of the year. End of the year is a great time to make some confessions before we start the new year, January 2024, with a clean slate. So let me just get this off my chest. Yes, my second confession is that I did not either sit down and watch the entire Jeffrey Lacasse police interview until recently, and there were three of them. There's 3 different times that he went in for an interview. We are going to jump into all of that and some of my observations on that case, some of my questions that perhaps some of my very intelligent listeners, viewers, and subscribers can let me know about. But first I want to discuss about what some of the comments were on the last video, which I thought were some great points that were made, and I want to discuss them. So part of the point was, in my last video, was that it was hard to imagine that if Wendi wanted Jeffrey Lacasse to be the fall guy. And that was the suggestion. That's what everybody was kind of understanding, that that's why she was so interested in if he was going to be in town on Friday. After all, they're breaking up, so then why are you asking him all these questions of where you're going to be on Friday? And it would have just been perfect that he would be leaving Friday morning right from that area. It looked like he's escaping town. So she really wanted to pin it on Jeffrey Lacasse. But if that is the truth, if that's what really the plan was, then I was wondering why she never mentioned Jeffrey Lacasse during the police interview. For 2 hours of the police interview, she did not mention anything about Jeffrey Lacasse. She mentioned a lot of other suspects, but not Jeffrey Lacasse. And in fact, until Jane came in and Jane mentioned that it was Jeffrey Lacasse, or that's a possible suspect, then they brought the investigator back in and they asked Wendi about all these questions. And Wendi again said that she doesn't even feel that Jeffrey was jealous of Danny Markel, but maybe he was jealous much more of Daniel Sack, who was this other person in her life that he felt that she was cheating on him with. So that was all really strange to me, that if you really want to stick it on Jeffrey Lacasse, why would you not mention him at all? So a few of the comments were that everybody knows that Wendi was talking Jane's ear off a week or two before the murder. And the reason that she was doing that is that she was planting all of these seeds in Jane's head so that when she does eventually get called to the police station, Jane will just right away jump to Jeffrey Lacasse being a possible suspect. And that way, Wendi, this is all planned out. Wendi was not going to mention Jeffrey Lacasse. She's going to look amazing. She's going to look like, oh, I never even thought about Jeffrey Lacasse. And then Jane's going to come in and say, oh, what about Jeffrey Lacasse? And that was all because she did this careful planning of talking her ear off a week before about how terrible Jeffrey is. And that way, this will all come out anyway. And that's what some of the suggestions were, that's why Wendi did not mention Jeffrey Lacasse at all in the interview. So I want to say a few things about that idea. Number one, it's possible. Okay, so you got that. It's possible. It is possible that she's just that much of a planner, and this was all in the plans from the beginning, that this is exactly how it's going to work out. But I'd also like to try to stay as objective as possible. That's what I do here. We try to bring you objective analysis and just kind of look at this, taking a step back, not getting emotionally involved, just trying to take a step back, think about this from an objective perspective. Okay, so let's go through the possibility that this was really all in the plan, which means if this was all in the plan, that means that Wendi had to know about what time the police were going to pick her up, right? If the police at all were lazy and didn't figure out where she was right away at a certain time, then that would throw all of these hours off, right? If they would pick her up a few hours later, then it could be all these planning would have been out the window, right? Because if she planned this all for a specific time, so that means that she planned that the police would pick her up from lunch during that time, and she knew that Jane would be available, that she wouldn't have just left town, or wouldn't have been stuck with some sort of other obligation, or just on some sort of social outing or whatever it is, that she'd actually be available to come to the police station, and that she would actually eventually spill the beans. Now, also on top of that is that she had to also know that the victim advocate's going to come in, and the victim advocate's going to ask her who she wants there, and that she would say Jane. So all of these things have to happen, right? Now, what's interesting about that, let's just play this out for a minute. Let's play this scenario out for a little bit. If this was all in the plan, she knew about what time she was going to be there. She knew that Jane's calendar was free. She knew that Jane was not going to be going anywhere, not going on a date, not going, but she's going to be available during that time to be able to come to the police station, and that she would actually come to the police station and not tell Wendi, oh, call a different friend. Okay. So then, what's interesting is that the victim advocate asks Wendi, who should we call to be with you? Now, if this is all part of the plan, who should Wendi say? Okay, so she can first say, well, I'd love for my family to be here, but they're not able to be here. Okay, fine. So that makes you look good. Okay, so let's get on to the realistic choices. So now that we get to realistic choices, okay, I'd love for my family to come. Okay, we'll talk to them. We'll figure out how to get them here. But you want somebody with you right now, somebody to comfort you, somebody to be with you. Who should you call? So enter Jane, right? I always say, okay, I have this great friend, Jane. Jane's my great friend. Let her come, right? That would be the time. That would be the perfect time to bring Jane in to the conversation, right? But if you look at the interview, that's not what she does. She doesn't even say Jane. She says Lynn. And she says, I'd really love for Lynn to be with me. Lynn's a different friend, not Jane. Now, were there any reports that Wendi was talking to Lynn about everything that's going on with Jeffrey Lacasse? Now, it's possible. It is possible that she was talking, people have multiple friends that they talk to about their relationships with. So it's possible that Wendi spoke to Lynn just as much as she spoke to Jane about it. It's possible. But again, the suggestion really here was that Wendi was talking to Jane about this and really not so much Lynn. But even if we were to assume that she was talking to Lynn and Jane, here's the other question. What does it hurt her to say Jeffrey Lacasse's name? I mean, you're giving them every other person under the sun. Because some people have also suggested, well, she knew the police were going to get to Jeff at some point, right? He was her ex-boyfriend. So it's very, very likely that the police would uncover him anyway. Well, that argument actually works just the opposite also. Well, if it's so possible, if it makes so much sense that the police are going to get to him anyway, so then what does it hurt for Wendi, and why does it even look bad for her to say that Jeffrey is possible as a suspect? She's giving the rest of the world as a suspect, so then why not say Jeffrey also? I mean, does it really make her look that much better that she didn't mention her ex-boyfriend, who's like a very, very common suspect in these type of cases? So it's again, I'm not saying it's not possible. I think it's possible that she orchestrated this all and did this purposely and didn't mention Jeffrey and hoped that Jane or Lynn would mention it, or even if Jane or Lynn were not going to mention it, but knew that the police were going to get them anyway, and therefore she specifically did not want to mention Jeffrey's name. Okay, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it also gives me pause to think whether this actually was her plan or not. So that's why I'm telling you, I'm having second thoughts about whether this actually was her plan, because I really, really don't see the harm for her. She's thinking this all out. If she's the mastermind behind all this, I don't really see the harm in just mentioning his name offhandedly along with the list of other suspects that you mentioned. So that's regarding that point. And also, while we're on that topic, let's talk a little bit about something that came up in Jeffrey's interview. So in Jeffrey's interview, they talked about that famous Friday conversation. And let's remember how that conversation came about. So the way that Jeffrey says over the story is that they were taking a little break, and then they were in touch for about 2 weeks. They were in touch with each other about 2 weeks, and things seemed to have been getting back together. Things seemed to have been moving in the right direction, in the direction that he wanted it to move, like that they're getting back together. And then they had a date set. Right? They had a date set, and then she was locked out of the house, and she called him, and then he said, it's okay, we'll just, we'll come and I'll just come and we'll talk on the porch, or we'll do that. And then eventually she did get in the house, and then she said, okay, just meet me for yoga. We'll go to yoga at 7 o'clock. And that's what happens. He goes and picks her up at yoga, and then at that point, that's when he said, things just didn't seem, things seemed over. It just seemed, from that yoga session, things seemed that they were just over. And that's what happened. And then they're walking to the car, they're saying goodbye to each other, and she calls him back and starts asking him about where he's going to be on Friday. And that just seems so strange to him. It seems so strange. If we're done now, if we're really done now, so then what are you asking me about my Friday schedule? I mean, who really cares, if you're done with me? Now, when he's actually asked, what's the story? Are you leaving on Friday or not? What is his response? His response is, this is his words, his response is, it's up in the air. He doesn't say, I am leaving Friday. He doesn't say, well, there's a 90% chance I'm leaving Friday. He says it's up in the air. So it's not really even giving Wendi a concrete day and time that he's leaving. So it could be, again, it could be that this idea that that he's really being framed with all this, it could be this is all put into his head. Now, again, I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, but this is another suggestion that it could be, it's just possible, that really this is not all part of Wendi's plan to stick it on Jeffrey, because he didn't even actually give her a solid, concrete answer. And just another thought about this is that here you have these two people. Jeffrey is obviously completely head over heels over Wendi, and Wendi does not seem to be reciprocating in the same way. And they're kind of going through this back and forth relationship. They're on, they're off, they're getting into fights, now they're back together, now they're off, now they're back. So this is how the relationship is going. It's great, it's bad, it's terrible, it's good. Things are getting back, things on the right track, things are not on the right track, right? So I don't think it's crazy for her, I don't know what she was feeling at the time. Let's just assume, let's just play devil's advocate here and assume that actually she was really thinking about the relationship. And at that point, she wasn't so hot about it. But she was thinking, maybe things will change. This is how this relationship is going. And I just want to know if he's going to be in town. Maybe if he's in town, maybe we will do something over the weekend. I don't know. It's just, it could make sense why she would want to know that he's in town over the weekend, so that in case she feels like she thinks more about the relationship and she decides, yeah, this is who I want to be with, so then I know that you're around and I can just reach out to you and then say, okay, let's talk, or something like that. So it's not crazy to think that either, that's why she was asking about Friday. The fact that he said it's up in the air, again, I'm not completely sold. I'm not completely sold on the idea that she was absolutely setting him up to be the fall guy. I don't see enough evidence for that just yet. Okay, again, it's possible, and I know many people feel that she's absolutely certain about that, but I'm trying to be as objective as I can, and I don't think objectively I can come to that conclusion just yet. Okay, so that's in terms of that. Now, another part of his interview, which I don't think this was brought out on the cross-examination of Jeffrey Lacasse, and I think that there certainly could have been a line taken, a few different lines, but one line that could have been taken is the following. Everybody knows that Jeffrey Lacasse's testimony on the stand basically remained the same. He was talking to Wendi the night that Wendi wanted to talk to him in confidence, right? And remember, Charlie's whole defense was that this is all one big joke. I never was serious. I never really looked into it. And when Jeffrey says, yeah, actually, Wendi told me that Charlie seriously looked into it, well, there goes your whole alibi, right? Well, let's remember what happened. So Jeffrey says so Wendi says she wants to talk to Jeffrey in confidence, and she says, Charlie looked into all options of taking care of the Daddy Markel problem, including hiring a hitman. It was going to be either $15,000 or later he amended it to maybe $50,000, but that's what it was, right? It was a $15,000 or $50,000 job, and it was a very serious conversation, right? Now, there was 3 interviews that Jeffrey gave with the police. July 21st, 2014, July 23rd, 2014, 2 days later, and then again March 6th, 2015. So 2 very close to each other, and then March 2015, many, many months later. Okay, which interview do you think he brought up that Wendi told him that the amount that Charlie found out that it would take to hire a hitman was $15,000 or $50,000? Which interview do you think it was? Well, would it surprise you that was not brought up until the 3rd interview? Meaning the first interview, July 21st, 2014, July 23rd, 2014, right away during that interview when he's saying, I'm telling you, you got to look into Charlie, you got to look into Charlie. This guy is he's weird. He's just crazy guy. I would really suspect him. He's cocky, arrogant, and okay. So when he's throwing Charlie under the bus, right? July 21st, July 23rd, 2014. He doesn't say anything about the $15,000 or $50,000. That comes up in March 6, 2015. Now, I think a decent line for cross-examination for Jeffrey Lacasse on the stand could have been, Mr. Lacasse, when did you find out, when did you figure out that the price was $15,000 or $50,000? Well, it was at the time that Wendi told me. Well, if it was at the time, why didn't you tell the police on July 21st, 2014 or July 23rd, 2014? Well, maybe you'll say, okay, well, July 21st, 2014, I was still so shaking from the whole thing. I was just scared. I was beside myself, and I couldn't think properly, and I just knew the conversation happened. I just don't remember the details of the conversation. Okay, fine. So maybe that's for July 21st, 2014. But then you went home, right? And you gathered your thoughts, and you yourself came back to the police station, and now that you're calm and you gathered your thoughts and what you felt is important, that's when you met with them again in July 23rd, 2014, right? Right. And during that interview, you didn't mention $15,000 or $50,000, did you? No, I didn't. Why not? Is it not important enough? Well, then why was it important in March 6, 2015 to come up with this number? Where did you get this number from, and why wasn't it important to mention in the other two interviews? So I think that was a reasonable line of questioning. Now, does it completely destroy Jeffrey Lacasse's testimony? No. But it does poke, I think, a hole, a pretty strong hole, in you're not remembering the details of that conversation so well, are you? And you're all of a sudden remembered new things in March 2015. Well, what other new things are you going to remember tomorrow that you're not telling this jury? Right? So this could be, I feel, like a line of questioning. I don't think that Charlie's attorney took this route, and I think it could be a decent route to take, with just poking holes in his whole memory of that whole conversation. Once you say, well, you obviously don't remember that conversation that well, well, then what else do you remember? And how do you so sure that you remembered everything else accurately? So that, I think, could be a line that was taken. Now, something else that also struck me when you're listening to Jeffrey Lacasse's testimony, Jeffrey Lacasse's interview. When you're watching this interview, listening to this interview, in the first interview, he was asked about Dan Markel. Now, he wasn't really asked so much about Dan Markel. He kind of offered a lot of information. And he started mentioning what he felt about Dan Markel. And listen to this. It's really unbelievable. He says, and he's pretty coarse about it also. So he says, Dan Markel had a job in Miami, right? He was a professor in Miami, but he was such a jerk. He used other language, but he was such a jerk that he lost that job. And he really had to work hard to lose that job, which means he really had to be a real jerk to lose that job. And then he was forced to come back to FSU, to Tallahassee. That's what he said about it. This is all coming straight out of the mouth of Jeffrey Lacasse. And then he said that also he would work on his computer on the way down to South Florida. So when they would when Danny Markel and Wendi Adelson would take trips from Tallahassee to South Florida, he forced Wendi to drive. He would work on his computer the entire way, and that Wendi was not allowed to speak for that entire drive from Tallahassee to South Florida. He said that he was emotionally abusive, he controlled the finances, and then he says, Jeffrey Lacasse says, that he thinks that Danny Markel may have been physically abusive with Wendi. Why? Because when you raise your voice to Wendi, she flinches like she's the victim of domestic abuse all the time. And that when you raise your voice, she's just getting ready for a smack or something. And that's what he was suggesting. And then he says, well, she denies that she's been physically abused, but people lie a lot and Wendi lies a lot. And then he says all her friends told her not to marry him, and she married him anyway. He comes home at 9 o'clock every night, very late, and he only plays with his kids for 10 minutes. She did everything in the house. She was like a slave. And then he said he was so surprised to see so many nice comments made about Danny Markel after he was murdered. Now, people make nice comments after someone who's murdered, even if he's not a nice guy while they're living. But he said, even this is something that Jeffrey Lacasse said, he was just surprised to see so many nice comments. And he says, because he doesn't know one person from his social circle who thinks that he was a great guy or thinks he was a nice guy. Also, he said that the first time that he met Danny Markel, he insulted him 3 or 4 times. Danny Markel insulted Jeffrey Lacasse for the first time that he met him 3 or 4 times in the first conversation. I mean, this is the picture that Jeffrey Lacasse is painting of who Danny Markel is. Now, that was in his first interview on July 21st, 2014. He comes back July 23rd, 2014 with some other information. And part of that is he tries to walk back some of his comments that he made about Danny Markel. And the way that he does it, he says that, he was still an arrogant guy. Danny Markel, this Harvard type of arrogant guy who would talk down to people. And he says, well, many professors are arrogant. But he was a good man and a good father. And the reason why he must have felt the way that he did in this first interview is because of Wendi. Wendy's manipulation of Jeffrey Lacasse about how Danny was treating her, that was all those negative things that I said about him was really because I was just parroting what Wendi convinced me about him. Okay, now hold on a second. You can't just get out of it that easily. So let's get back to what he said and see if that argument works for all the things that he said. Okay, so that he lost his job in Miami because he was such a jerk, and that's why he had to come back to FSU, and he had to really work hard to lose that job in Miami. Okay, how is Jeffrey Lacasse supposed to actually have personal knowledge about what happened so that we can pass off as, yeah, you're probably just parroting what Wendi told you. Also, the fact that he would work on his computer from Tallahassee to South Florida and force Wendi to drive, and that no one was allowed to speak in the car. Again, how is Jeffrey supposed to know that? So yeah, it's possible that he was just parroting everything that Wendi said. But hold on a minute. He also said that Jeffrey Lacasse, said that you think that he may have been physically abusing her. Why? Because anytime that you would raise your voice to Wendi, she would flinch like a domestic abuse victim does when you raise their voice to them. Now that's an observation that you made yourself. What is with that observation? That's not something that Wendi told you. Were you not being honest about that? Were you not saying the truth about that? Or not? So that's not something that you can just blame on Wendi. I'm sorry. So what's with that? Then, okay, he says that all her friends told her not to marry him. All right, well, that's again probably from Wendi. Comes home at 9 o'clock every night and plays with the kids for 10 minutes. That's also probably from Wendi. She did everything in the house, that she was a slave. That's probably also from Wendi. But what about this? What about that Jeffrey Lacasse said that there's not one person in his social circle that thinks that Danny's a nice guy, or that he's a great guy, or whatever the terminology was. That's your own social circle. That's how you said that. You didn't say that that's what that's not something that Wendi would tell you. This is something that you have. You're a professor. You're a professor in FSU. So you all have friends. You have social circles there. And you told the investigator that you don't have one person in your social circle who thinks that he's a nice guy. That's not something you can blame on Wendi. Were you not being honest when you said that? Now also, you say that the first time that he met you, that Danny Markel met you, he insulted you 3 or 4 times in that conversation. Is that true or not? That's not something that Wendi told you. That's something that you observed. You felt it. So why am I talking about all this? I'm not talking about this to show you that, oh, you see that Jeffrey Lacasse can't be trusted and he was not, and we completely discredit his testimony. Of course not. He did a very good job on the stand. Anybody who saw that thought that he did a good job. I think everyone felt that he did well under cross-examination. But just looking at this interview, from my perspective, I think that there's certain things that could have been explored that were not explored. And I think that the Danny Markel angle of how Jeffrey Lacasse felt about him is not something that should have been left alone. It could have been explored, and it could have just perhaps opened up some more avenues to try to poke some holes into some of his testimony, some of his credibility. I mean, was he saying the truth? Was he not saying the truth? Or do people disagree with him about what his summation is about who Danny Markel is? Now, of course, you're not allowed to get into character testimony, but here you're talking about judgment. You're talking about whether he is being honest or not during his interview with the police, and whether he's being honest on the stand. And that should be fair game. Okay, these can be arguments made with the judge, but these are just my observations from this interview that he gave, which, again, I'm just pointing this out as how I observe some of these things. Then he moves on to talk about his relationship with Wendi. And looking at everything that he talks about in that relationship, really, there's really not much else you can do but feel bad for him. You hear about what their relationship was like, and it's just heart-wrenching. On the one hand, you've got that this is what he acknowledges. This is all the things that he acknowledges at the same time that he says that he really still run back to her. Essentially, that's what he said in his interview. He said that if she would text him back now saying, "Hey, let's get together," he would pursue that. And listen to what he's acknowledged, what he realizes this relationship is like. He says that Wendy's not really an adult. Wendy's babied by her parents. The family is enmeshed very unhealthily. So it's an unhealthy family situation. The topic of conversation is dominated by her divorce with Danny and the fact that she hates living in Tallahassee, which is also connected with the divorce. So essentially, the main topic of their conversation is her divorce and what's going on with her divorce and all of the ancillary issues that the divorce is creating for her. So that's the type of conversations they're having. That's the main topic of conversation. Can you imagine having a relationship with somebody that's the entirety of the conversations? I'm sure they're talking about other things also, but that is the main topic of conversation. Now, of course, all exes talk about previous relationships, and I'm sure it comes up in conversations, but it's not the dominant part of their conversation. You're trying to build a new relationship with somebody, and your heart kind of goes out for Jeffrey because he's coming off a divorce. He's a 50-year-old man. He's probably looking for a partner that he can settle down with. And here, this is Wendi. He's just head over heels over her, and you're hearing about the types of red flags that were like flagging in his face, waving in his face this entire time, and just he's completely ignoring it. So your heart completely goes out for him. So it's a very sensitive area, and I don't want to sound like I'm insensitive to that. Obviously, it's just you hear about it and your heart goes out for him. And he says that she has no sense of guilt. There's no empathy. She's a pathological liar. And he thinks that she was cheating on him the entire time, and she would go down to South Florida and she would completely drop off the grid. She wouldn't return his phone calls and until she got back to Tallahassee, and then even then she would be like a little weird with him. The relationship was a little bit weird, which would cause all these red flags to think that she's cheating on him. And then he finally does discover that she is cheating on him. And still, while he's giving this interview, he basically said that he would still go back to her. So, you know, on the one hand, you've got to really, really feel bad for him. And I don't want to belittle that. Like it's your heart goes out to him. If you're the attorney on the other side of Jeffrey and you're cross-examining him, then you would probably want to try to exploit this a little bit. You'd probably want to try to show how his judgment is so bad. And if his judgment is so bad with his relationship with Wendi, you know, what could we judge? And then that may be that type of argument to make to the jury that, look, you know, they're hanging their hat on this person who obviously shows very bad, poor judgment. Now, of course, there's, you know, it's not like a winning argument, but it's just something else that possibly could be brought out. So that's what we're doing here. We're not really, you know, we're just bringing out different analysis that perhaps a lawyer may make who is representing Charlie or representing other defendants in this case, what they could have learned and used in this interview with Jeffrey for the benefit of their own case. So that was essentially the main issues with the interview. Of course, there were some other things like the fact that she changed her Facebook picture a few days before the murder that she hasn't changed in the longest time, kind of sensing that, and this is a person who really cares about the way that her public appearance. So knowing that her picture would be shown all over the news, perhaps that was the reason that Jeffrey was saying that she changed that picture. Some other interesting things that came out from this interview, but I think we covered most of the main parts. And so that's it. So we will see if there's any further confessions of mine before the end of the year about other interviews or other things. And that will do it for today. Please, if you haven't yet, please subscribe, like the video so we can continue bringing you this analysis. That's it for now. See you next time.